So what's the deal with mastering alts and stems? What AI tools do I use? Do you really need a full album to pitch to libraries? How do you know what sounds to use for any of your cues? Do you have to include hired musicians in your backend royalties? What's the best way to find references? How do you master a really dynamic track to an even loudness? Do libraries need classical music covers? What are some of the best panning practices? What are some things to watch out for when using samples? How long should I have to wait for placements to show up in my PRO catalog? What's transition music? What are some of the best methods for learning your sample libraries? And finally, how's my Mac Studio working out? Well, it's the return of the Q&A on this week's episode of the 52Qs podcast. What is happening, everybody? This is Dave Croft, and welcome back to another episode of the 52Qs podcast, a weekly podcast dedicated to all things production and library music, where we talk about industry topics and take deep dives into the different aspect of being a working production music composer. Plus, in my Year of Taxi update, we're going to check in on any returns or forwards and take a listen to this week's submission, which is an action percussion cue. And then a little later on, I'm going to give my thoughts on a stomp clap cue written by 52Qs community member Dolfo Picano. So you definitely want to stick around for that. If this is your first time here, welcome. Whether you're watching on YouTube or listening to the audio podcast on the go, I just want to thank you for, spending part of your day here with me. I also have to give a huge word of thanks to the family, friends, and patrons of 52Qs who help keep the channel, the podcast, and everything going. We are 100% community supported, so if you like what I do here, don't thank me, thank them. But, if you want to learn more about how you can help support 52Qs and also unlock extra perks like live streams, workshops, Zoom feedback sessions, and a ton more, then be sure to click on the links in the description or stick around, because we're going to be talking more about that a little bit later in today's episode. So let's check in on my Year of Taxi. And I have heard back from my week 15 drone tension cue and the week 16 investigation tension cue. And I'm sad to say that Discomfort Drone was a return. And let's get that kind of in our ears here. And this is from Screener 452. And 452 says, what I liked most about this song was I liked the different synth textures you have on here. I think it could be improved by, I find the intro fade in too long. I think we can shorten the track. Could maybe be, I think we can shorten that. The track could maybe be a bit louder, especially at the start. You have to basically make a 2-minute version of the reference for this to work. Okay. I returned or forwarded this song because could use more work in terms of the composition and production. As it stands, the layers sort of blur together. It's missing some of the edge found in the references. Regardless, I would shorten the intro and offer a little more bulk to the end. Yeah, I'm not sure about that. I think ultimately it was too long. It was the brief was looking for around 2 minutes. And 2:13, although the audio tail hits at 2:05, so I imagine that's a pretty long audio tail. So I'm guessing the takeaway there is it's too long. If that's the case, then yeah, I think that's the point that 452 is making there. Appreciate that feedback. But I am happy to report that the CSI investigation cue was forwarded, and this was a prosecution fetish, and we'll get that back in our ears. And this was a forward from 396, who has been pretty kind to me. If I look back at the returns and forwards, 396, even though 396 was the Waltz of Shame, but they were right about the slide whistle. Yep, that's a mea culpa there. But they said, what I like most about this song, very cool ideas for this genre. The pulses do a nice job of moving the cue forward. Thank you. It could be improved by, we can minimize the metallic scrapes just a bit more so they don't jump out quite as much. Yeah, that's a good note. Upon listening to it, I hear that the bowed china is popping out of the texture. So I would absolutely tweak that. I like them. We just need to make sure they don't distract from the scene. I returned or forwarded this because nice buildup of tension as the cue progresses. Good sounding cue. in this style. So yeah, I'm really happy with that. I'm really happy with this one. And thank you. Thank you to 396 and also to 452 for your feedback on those. So for this week, I am writing an action percussion instrumental cue. And the brief reads, action percussion instrumentals and or instrumental cues are needed by an international music library with lots of great placements in film and TV. They're looking for several mid to up-tempo instrumentals or cues that could be heard on a playlist, and then they give some examples. Please produce well-produced action instrumentals or cues with driving rhythms, high-quality percussion instruments, and tons of epic energy. Craft your pieces around a central mood and layer instrumentation in and out as they progress to create a sense of forward motion, dynamics, and interest. Percussion instruments should be the focal elements in the arrangement, but some minimal and subtle additional instrumentation can work as well. Just be sure not to overdo it. Your production should be polished, and any virtual sounds and samples you use should be high quality and cutting edge as well. Your submission should be roughly 90 seconds long for cues and 2 to 4 minutes for instrumentals, give or take, non-faded button endings, don't use unauthorized samples, and there we go. So this cue is called Clocked. Let me refresh that. This cue is called Clocked and Loaded. That was Clocked and Loaded, and I leaned pretty heavily into trailer technique and trailer structure form, the impacts, whooshes, the big percussive bump, bump, triplets, and all of that stuff. That's technique directly from trailery type stuff, and so yeah, we'll see what happens. We'll see if they dig that. Now, I want to kind of give another update for my year of taxi. Last year, this would have been, probably September or October, I was looking into 2023 and thinking of what features I can add to the podcast that are going to add a lot of value to folks and showcase a whole kind of segment of the composing process, the life of a production music composer. And I turned to Taxi, because Taxi is one of, if not the largest kind of player in the production music, sync music, A&R space. And while I had left Taxi earlier in the year, even did a podcast episode about it, I left Taxi, but the idea was okay, let's commit to writing one cue per week for the entire year and kind of bring you along that journey. And there's been some ups and downs, and I've enjoyed doing the work. However, and this has nothing to do with returns, forwards, has nothing to do with last week's interview with Michael or the things that I would hope were different in the industry about, hearing back from live. This has nothing to do with any of those. But I will say that the recent conversations have kind of allowed me to take a look at Taxi, my personal relationship with Taxi, meaning as a composer, and my obligations and my commitments and my bandwidth to my existing libraries. Back in 2022, I didn't renew my Taxi membership because I was unable to serve the libraries I already had and pitch regularly to Taxi. I was unable to really do that. And so I let my subscription lapse. Talked about it. Nothing but love for Taxi. But I was hoping that by committing to a year of Taxi, that it would kind of push me forward into that and motivate me to write more. And it has. That has worked because I have been writing 1 cue per week for the last 17 weeks and pitching them up to Taxi with various levels of success. I think by the end, we've had 10 forwards, 6 returns, and 0 deals so far. And clocked and loaded, I hope. That's the last one. It'll either be a forward or return, I guess. And again, this isn't really about that because I've written for 17 straight weeks. However, I don't really have more bandwidth than I did last year. In fact, if I'm being honest, and I'm just being honest with you, in fact, there have been some opportunities that I have let atrophy because I've been giving attention to Taxi. These are real opportunities that I've had that I've not taken advantage of because I've been following this year of Taxi journey. Because it's something I wanted to do. It's something I wanted to be a real big part of the podcast. I wanted to bring you along on this journey, and it's working, but it's starting to pull me away from the commitments that I already have, unfortunately. So what am I saying? I'm saying that this week will be my last entry into my year of Taxi. That I'm kind of pulling the plug on it because I need to take care of the relationships I already have, and I can't, even though I committed to it, even though I said to you that I would. At the end of the day, I have to take care of the relationships I already have, and I can't sacrifice those because of this new thing over here. Does that make sense? Again, this has nothing to do with the number of forwards versus the number of returns or the number of deals. It has nothing to do with everything we talked about last week. But that did give me an opportunity to take a really kind of sobering look at this. I have to give my bandwidth to the things which I already, before my year of Taxi, that I've already got on the burner. Now, I'm not quitting Taxi. I still have, several more months left on my subscription. And if things kind of die down with these other commitments that I have, then I might pitch to Taxi. I still believe in what Taxi is doing. I still believe that it is a viable way to get your music in front of libraries. I believe Michael when he says that cues get listened to. I believe that. And if you don't believe that, then just move on, But again, I don't want to relitigate or rehash last week's podcast episode. But I'm just kind of being real and telling you where I'm at with this. Because I can't ultimately, in the name of a year of Taxi, in the name of this grand experiment that I've done, that I've set out to do, I can't keep putting energy into that and letting these very real things die on the vine. And I hope you understand where I'm coming from. I know for some of you, that's going to be pretty disappointing. especially some of you folks who joined the Year of Taxi group over at 52Qs. To be honest, I'm not sure what to do with that group, but that's not my group. It's our group. And so I want to hear from you. What would you like to do with that group? If you want to keep your Year of Taxi going, then by all means, keep going, and I will be your biggest champion. I will put my arm over your shoulder when you get the return, and I will trumpet your victories as loud as anybody. But for me and my journey, my professional journey, my career, I don't think it is the optimum use of my relatively limited bandwidth. Because I don't have any more bandwidth now. In fact, I probably have less. The channel, the podcast. Now I'm doing like motorcycle vlogs. Not to mention the community is reaching 500 members, and we're doing, masterminds and feedback sessions and all these things, which I absolutely love. But I have to give bandwidth and time to those libraries who I've committed to, who I've had long-term relationships with. I have to give them the bandwidth first. If I'm being honest, even before this YouTube channel, even before the community, moto vlogs, the libraries, the music has to come first. And at the end of the day, my Year of Taxi was about an experiment that I can bring you along with. But I can't do that experiment if these relationships and commitments are starting to suffer. So, like I said, I want to hear from you what you think and how you think we should progress with the Year of Taxi group over in 52Qs. Please let me know. And if you have comments, questions, whatever, let me know in the comments below. I read those. I've been really happy with the level of discussion that's been going on in the group or in the YouTube comments. It's been really, really lively and pretty respectful. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much. But that's where I am at. And yeah, of course, if I get any deals, I'm going to come in and tell you about it. If I get a deal from, which I guess is ultimately now my winter of taxi, maybe, I don't know, my 4 months of taxi, I'll absolutely let me know. But for everybody who joined me, everybody who was super encouraging, to the folks over in the community who just poured out their support for this, thank you so much. It really means a lot. All right. So with all that said, let's get on to today's topic, which is Q&A. All right, let's take a look at it. So a few weeks ago, I asked the 52Qs community if they have any questions for an upcoming Q&A episode, and boy, did they deliver. Got a ton of questions, and I ran through all of them in the intro, and I will have timestamps below in this video and in the podcast, so if you want to skip over some of these, you absolutely can, or if you want to go to a specific one or reference it, yeah. So we're going to get through all of these. It's probably going to be a supersized episode, but that's okay. That's okay. The first one comes from Chris Clairhout, who says, alt mixes plus stems plus individual tracks. Which ones go through the master chain and which ones not? Or all of them? How do libraries use those individual tracks and why do they need them? To be honest, I've got kind of mixed answers about this. And from a mixing challenge, and some other folks asked very similar questions about mastering stems and alts. And let's first kind of define what these are. Alt mixes are versions of your cues with certain elements muted or certain elements grouped together. This is not to be confused necessarily with stems, which generally means, for production music libraries, groups of similar type sounds. So here are all the bass sounds, here are all the percussion sounds, here's all the melody sounds, all grouped together and exported. Where it gets confusing is the term stem means something different in different applications. So for a mixing or a mastering engineer, stems means each individual track because they are going to reassemble that mix. They're going to take all of your tracks, put them all together so that they end up with the full mix. That's what they need for stems. Now, in my experience, which admittedly, I don't have many libraries at all. Matter of fact, I'm trying to think if I have any libraries I work with who want individual stems mastered because they're going to reassemble it, because that just creates a world of technical challenges to go through. But in my experience, if they want individual tracks, they actually want you to turn off the mastering chain so that they can reassemble the mix and then do their own mastering pass on it. But I do know, I've heard from other members who have libraries asking for stems that are mastered, but when put all together equals the level, volume, output of a full mix master that you provide. The frustration comes is when you're sending fewer sounds into the mastering chain. Like let's say you have just the melody stems. Well, you're not hitting all of the mastering compression and exciter and limiter. You're not hitting that with nearly the same energy as you are a full mix. And so the compressor is going to react differently. And to be honest, I've researched this. I would love to hear from anybody who has a solution to this. I haven't found a simple, straightforward, easy way to do this where I can give mastered stems so that I can just export them out of Logic or Cubase or whatever, and then stack them up together. The stems are mastered, and the collection all creates the final mastered sound. The only way that I've compensated for this is I will put a 6 dB cut or gain reduction on my stems, because that seems to be about the loudness that gets, and I'm sure there's math here, but that seems to be about the loudness that you need to pull out so that your stems all grouped together will give you pretty close to the full mix. But even still, that's just loud. That's just gain. That's not actually compensating for how the compressor reacts to less dynamic energy hitting it. So if they're asking for alt mixes or minus mixes, then I leave those mastered. Like I said, I very rarely, if ever, have to give actual stems these individual tracks. And stems is just short for stereo mix or stereo master. So a full mix is technically a stem. So for me, alt mixes, minus mixes, those kind of mean the same thing. They might be like a mix with no melody. It's minus mix. It might be an underscore mix, which is the mix with the melody and typically the percussion stripped out, or that might also be called a bed mix. You might also hear something called an underscore mix, which has just the pad. So anything pulsing, it's just kind of pads and smooth sounds. You might also have a drum and bass only stem or alt mix. So yeah, that's how that all works. And I would love to hear from you listeners if you have ideas on how to solve that. Because I've looked, I've researched, I've asked folks, and nobody has a really simple explanation on how you can export mastered stems simply without it creating an issue. It's like, so where it sounds identical. I think you can get close, but I'm not sure how to make it sound identical. Now, as far as why do they need these, it's all about giving editors maximum flexibility. So let's imagine a scenario where you have your music in a scene and it's perfect and there's no dialogue and it's great. But the rest of the scene, let's say 30 seconds into the scene, there is heavy dialogue, and now suddenly your melody is in the way. Your melody interferes with the dialogue. Well, if that's the only version of your cue that they have, the only option for an editor is to go find another piece of music that is probably in the same key, probably in the same mood, emotion, instrumentation, tempo, all of that, and then edit that piece of music under the dialogue portion of the scene, which creates a couple of issues. Issue number one is you've increased work for the editor because the editor has to go back into the library and find something that works. But the bigger issue is now you are out those royalties. However, if we can provide a version of our cue that simply has the melody muted out, then it's a win-win. It's a win for the editor because they don't have to go spelunking into their library to find a new cue that works. They can just use the version that is already associated with the full mix cue that they're already using. But even more importantly than that, you get to keep the royalties. The royalties keep rolling in your favor. So that's why we need to give them those. It's all about getting maximum flexibility. And yeah, if you give editors a version of your cue with the percussion and the melody stripped out, you don't have to remaster to that higher level. You can just leave them. I mean, quite literally, when I create my alt mixes and minus mixes, it's just muting or soloing. That's it. Because the reduction in energy, the reduction in gain is what they need. It makes the editor's job easier. They don't have to get as nearly as fiddly with ducking and with making sure that the music doesn't get too loud because it's already softer than the full mix was. So it's just about giving editors options. And in general, the types of stems that you will need to give are going to be full mix, obviously, and I'm using stems, alt mixes, minus mixes, a little interchangeably. A no melody mix, a mix with no melody and no percussion, a mix with percussion and bass. So that's all bass sounds, like low end energy sounds. A version with the percussion stripped out, so no percussion. A version with just the percussion, right? So just a percussion stem, and that would be considered a stem, just a melody stem. And yet most libraries will tell you what they want and then give you the option to add more. Some are very prescriptive, give me only these, but some will allow you a little bit more freedom. All right, so that's about alts and stems. And Alan followed up that question, and I'll circle back to you have. I know, Chris, you have a couple of other questions. As with Chris, exporting stems and their level through the mastering chain or not, should we use a sidechain function on the limiter so that there's no clipping when summing all the stems? How do I do that? It gets really complicated, and the real challenge is, like libraries in general, editors are not going to be necessarily reassembling your track. Now, if you're doing a film score, if you are sending it off to a mixing or a mastering engineer, if you are submitting game assets, then you would give them individual stems because somebody is going to reassemble your mix, and they need significantly more granular control. But editors generally don't need that type of granular control. But yeah, I would love to hear from folks with more experience in exporting mastered stems, mastered alt mixes that can be reassembled, because I want to know that too. All right, so thank you, Chris and Alan, for that question. And so, yeah. Chris also asks, the use of sequencers in sync music often done or not? Do you mean like arpeggiators, or do you mean like step sequencers? I think whatever you need to do to get your end result. I think where we get a little into a little trouble is when we're using pre-written patterns, especially when they have melodic content. And so you hold down one, and the arpeggiated pattern includes different pitches beyond the octave. And so using that as a basis for your entire cue can run into the same issues with using loops. You know, even though it's not from Splice, it might be from your Alchemy or Omnisphere or Serum or whatever. If it's playing something melodic, then you run the risk of somebody else having access to that same pattern and basing their cue on it. And so that causes some problems. So I would be careful with that. And then Chris says, AI in sync, current experience and use, and AI tools to mention, like the ones to generate song titles. I got to tell you, the only AI that I use, the only AI that I really use is ChatGPT. And the reason I really like it is not as a creative output, but it really can be a good digital assistant from like complex math problems to helping sort out my CSS for my live streams for OBS, for helping write emails, to making summaries. Like anytime I post a video, I write a description for the YouTube video. Well, last week I took my opening section, my little script that I write for the opening of the podcast, I put that into ChatGPT and said, write a YouTube description based off of this script. Still my words, but it saved me all kinds of time from having to okay, how do I reword a script into something that reads more like a YouTube description? So that's been really, really handy for me. As far as generating song titles, I've already started to be able to sniff out AI generated song titles. I think it's a good starting point. It's really nice to find, for example, or let me finish my thought, to find puns and other words, like words that rhyme with whatever. For Discomfort Drone from a couple of weeks ago, I used ChatGPT to help me generate that title because I thought of words that sound like the word drone, then a bunch of rhyming words. Okay, let's pick a couple of these phrases. Give me phrases that incorporate words that sound like drone. And so one of them was comfort zone. So that was a phrase. All right. Comfort drone, because drone rhymes with zone. And instead of comfort, discomfort. That's how I used ChatGPT to help me arrive to that title. I think where we get into trouble is when we say, give me some titles for tension cues. And they can sound really generic. Yep. We had a feedback session yesterday, and somebody submitted a cue, and I'm like, that smells like an AI generated title. And it turns out it was. It was an AI generated title. So if I can start sniffing these things out, I imagine your libraries are going to get pretty adept at sniffing those out. I know that AI is a big topic. I mean, Jesse over at Sync My Music has shifted his entire channel's focus into this. I don't think it's anything to be scared of. I think it's something that we should be aware of. But I think the folks who are going to be successful through it are the ones who are going to embrace it and realize and figure out how to use it. I think the lowest hanging fruit is in trouble of getting replaced by AI. And we're talking about the super generic, you're right. Yeah. The super generic type cues that if you can crank out 10 cues in a day, then chances are AI can crank out a similar type. That's not to disparage you, because those types of cues are make up a large portion of Pond 5 and those types of marketplaces. So I think the lowest hanging fruit is probably in danger, just like the lowest hanging fruit of stock photography and stock images. But you get past a point where, yeah, I think some of this stuff's not going to be able to pass the smell test. So yeah. So ChatGPT is really the only one. The other AI that I do use, I'll correct myself. The other AI that I use DALL-E, DALLE. And I've been using DALL-E for a while to generate artwork, thumbnails for my own SoundCloud. Because before I was just kind of going to stock photo sites and everything. And so this is an AI generated image. That is an AI generated image. Another AI generated image. And I've been using these for a while. And every now and then you'll get some really, this was for D20 Detectives. And that thumbnail looks really, really good. But sometimes you get some really wonky results. This is AI generated. And if you look, you're like, hey, that's cool. But look a little closer. I mean, what's happening with this lady's eye? It's really, really weird and wonky, and fingers and hands are still a thing. That's another AI generated image. We have one here. And sorry for you audio folks. I know this is Not very excited. These are all AI generated images here. Yep, AI. That's AI. AI. Got to get medieval. AI. So we'll have links to Dolly as well as ChatGPT for you to check out, and so yeah. And let me find one here. This is another. Yeah, these are all AI. These are all AI generated images. Um, the one that was really weird was Waltz of Shame. It looks pretty okay until you take a close look at the hands. It gets a little creepy, but yeah. And so I use AI for that as well. So, so yeah. Thank you, Chris, for those questions. Really, really appreciate you. And thank you, Alan, for that follow up. All right. Gun Brit asks, can the music companies choose an AI song instead of my song? I mean, that AI makes 183,000 songs in one go when I try to make one per week. The Royal Institute of Technology has received a lot of money from Foundation to develop AI so that it can sense embarrassment and danger before a public performance. Speaking of originality, hope I'm not overreacting. And this kind of goes to my last point, which is to say, I think the lowest hanging fruit is in danger of getting replaced by AI. But I think there's a threshold that's still going to require human interaction. And so I don't think there's much to be worried about. You just keep focus on getting better at your craft. But like I said, cranking out 10, 20 tracks a day and just pumping them out. And here's the reality of the situation, though. The folks who would rather use AI instead of hiring a composer or using production music from humans probably wasn't going to pay you much, if anything at all. For example, my thumbnails here, I wasn't paying an artist to generate my thumbnails before. I was just pulling them off of a stock site or whatever. But I would never put a $150,000 ad campaign on an AI generated piece of art. I mean, not just because, copyright laws are not even ready to tackle this issue. So I think we're going to be okay. Can music companies choose an AI song? Yes. Would they have paid for your song to begin with? Probably not. The folks who are kind of, salivating at the thought of using AI music probably already didn't put a high value on music. So yeah. I hope that helps. I hope that's not too doom and gloom. All right, Christopher asks, I'm sure this might be repeating old information, but I have heard of roughly 3 ways of presenting your work when approaching libraries. 1, have a full album. 2, have half an album and they give you input and then you do the rest. Or 3, your best 3 tracks, no matter if they're able to get them or not. Try to listen to what libraries themselves say, and I would say that no approach is wrong, but some prefer one or the other. You've spoken to a few podcast guests that I'm sure have spoken about this. What is the safest approach? Can you mix ways of presenting depending on what you're working on or how you want to work with the library? I would say to your third point here, your best 3 tracks, regardless of whether or not they are available, I'm not sure that's the best strategy. Because libraries aren't necessarily looking to hire composers. They don't want composers for their roster. They want cues for their catalog. And so while it might not be a complete dead end, I think it's the least effective unless you have a relationship already, or unless you have a way to kind of I don't know, if the oils of networking have already been lubricated, or the gears have been lubricated. For example, going to PMC last year, I handed out business cards with playlist of cues which were already placed, but it wasn't necessarily a cold submission or a cold lead. This is somebody I'm shaking hands with, having a beer with, out on the patio or whatever. And so in that case, then you are presenting yourself as a composer who wants to work with a library. However, if you're pitching to a library through email or whatever, then saying, here's what I have done isn't nearly as valuable as here's what I do, and here is what's available that you can take right now. I think albums are a very good way of working with libraries. In fact, we have a whole album accelerator program here at 52Qs, which you can sign up for. We have, we run ads for it during the podcast and all of that, that focuses on this, because in the end, pitching an album shows a library that you're ready for a professional commitment and a professional relationship, and you have sustainable creativity and all of these kind of things. Not to mention, it gives libraries a turnkey solution. Like, here are 10 to 15 tracks that I think are great, I think you're going to think are great, are a perfect fit for your library, and you can take and publish right now. I think that's very attractive to a library. It's not required, because you can pitch just a handful of cues, especially the first unsolicited, like, you can do that 100%. So I think and you've actually kind of put them in order. Number one, have a full album that really resonates with that library. Then have a handful of tracks. I don't even think you have to have a half album, probably 3 tracks. But number 3 here, probably your least effective method, I would imagine. Because again, libraries aren't necessarily they're not looking for composers, they're looking for cues. Somewhat. This is where like PMC can really, really help. This is the Production Music Conference, by the way. This is where this can really, really help out, because you're creating relationship in that moment, and face-to-face networking is very valuable. And in lieu of that, joining the Production Music Association and going to their Zoom sessions. They have monthly meet and greet Zoom networking sessions where you are just hanging out with industry professionals, publishers, other composers. You might be sitting in the room with the A&R rep from BMI or CSAC, and they're just hanging out, and you can chat industry. And I've gotten so many LinkedIn connections through those Zoom chats, because a lot of times we'll post our information. Here's our website. I've talked about 52Qs. And so that is person to person. But if you're just pitching to a library, then I think a full album is your best bet to go with that, but not required. So thank you, Christopher. Thanks for sending that along. Michael asks, how do you know what sounds to use for your cues? That seems to be my biggest frustration when trying to sit down to work on a cue. It kind of sucks out the energy sometimes. When you see a brief and it says trip hop, for instance, do you already have an idea what sounds to use? Also, how much auditioning sounds do you spend time on? You always seem to have the right sounds in every video I see. Well, in the videos that you see, what you often don't see is the hours of pre-production and the hours that have gone into selecting the sounds. You don't see the 4, 6 to 8 hours behind the cue. It's just like, here's the cue, it's done. And it feels a little bit like a cooking show where, I say, in today's episode, we're going to, make Thanksgiving dinner, and then cut the commercial and come back and there's a turkey, right? That's a little bit kind of what it feels like. But what you didn't see is, brining the turkey, working on the stuffing, working the breadcrumbs. You didn't see all of that process because it's the least fun part of the job. So I think there are a couple of things here. How do I know what sounds to use? Well, first is knowing the type of cue you're writing. And before you even start writing, have an idea for what sounds you might need. And that comes from referencing. That comes from understanding. I mean, let's go back to food. Maybe I just need breakfast. But if I say, hey, you're about to cook Thanksgiving dinner, you already have an idea of what to cook. You already know there's probably turkey, stuffing, cranberry sauce, right? Probably some cornbread, depending on where you are, maybe some collard greens. You already know the ingredients you're going to need to put that meal together. And then, each dish gets broken down into its individual components. And here's a turkey. Okay, here's a stuffing. And now I need like sage and tarragon, whatever. Do you put? No, I said tarragon. Do you don't think you put tarragon into stuffing? But I do know. Know you use sage, and so it's kind of the same way when writing cues. But if you don't know the recipe, if you don't know what meal you're trying to prepare, then you're left just kind of guessing. And so how do you know the meal? Well, you got to go do some taste test, go do some reference work, find references. And if you're writing to taxi briefs, then I think you got to reach beyond the briefs that they give you, beyond the references that they give you, which can be a little bit of a double-edged sword, because I know the screeners will really drill you if you pull too far off of the references. But it comes with taste testing. Okay, so that's part number one, knowing what components, what ingredients you need. Part number two, however, is knowing, here so many food metaphors, knowing your pantry, knowing the tools, knowing where your that fillet knife is, knowing where your colander is, knowing if you have enough sugar, and if you have all-purpose flour, or knowing where your ingredients are, knowing where your tools are. That's vital. Otherwise, it's like Thanksgiving dinner, and you're like, okay, I need cranberry sauce, and I know I have cranberry sauce, and you open the pantry, nope, and so, okay, I'm going to the grocery store. That slows things down, and I'm back. All right, so now, I'm ready for the turkey, and we're gonna put it on the grill. So, oops, I'm out of charcoal, and back to the grocery store. All right, so that comes with knowing, back to music, knowing your samples, knowing your library, know what sounds you have, knowing what instrument accomplishes the sound that you're going for. For example, you mentioned trip hop. I know I'm probably going to need some hip hop sounds, so I'm going to go into either Splice and grabbing one shots, or going into the Drum Machine Designer, finding those sounds, and then auditioning patch after patch after patch, which is admittedly the least fun part. No, metadata is probably the least fun part. It can be kind of exhausting, just auditioning patch after patch after patch. I totally get that. I totally get it. But I think setting time aside, you're not producing anything, but setting aside time where you are just listening to sounds that you have in your library. I mean, Omnisphere ships with an embarrassing amount of presets, an embarrassingly large amount of presets. Something like 35, or no, I think it's like up to 70 gigabytes of samples that you get with Logic. I mean, it seems like every month I'm finding new sounds that Logic has. Just yesterday, we were talking about erhu, which is a traditional Chinese fiddle. And I opened up the Apple Loop library, and there's all these erhu samples that I never knew existed. I mean, I figured there were some in there, but man, there is an exhaustive list of those things. So knowing your ingredients, knowing your tools, knowing what you have in the pantry, what you might need in the pantry, and spending time organizing, structuring. Yep. Which is funny because Shannon just recently, in the last few months, completely gutted our pantry in the kitchen, pulled everything out, like everything, to the studs, and then reorganized it. And it's been zen-like. It's been beautiful, which means that we had some stuff in there we needed to throw away, some food, like some non-perishable food, which had perished long ago. We're talking like 2019 boxes of macaroni and cheese and oatmeal packets and stuff like that. And then she said a bunch of stuff that's like, here are things we need to work our way through, and put it like on the breakfast room table. And we kind of slowly worked our way through it. So that's kind of like going into your sample library and realizing, oh my gosh, there are erhu samples here. I never knew they were sitting at the bottom of the pantry, behind paper towel rolls, and a bag of russet potatoes, which have turned to liquid. Sorry, that was a little gross, if not autobiographical. So, yep, there's a PSA for you. If you have potatoes in your pantry, check in on them, because there's potatoes, and then there's potatoes with eyes, And then there's just potatoes who give up. It's just like, we're done on this. We're going to shuffle off this mortal coil. That's weird. I don't know why I'm talking about potatoes, but there you go. All right, Michael, thank you very much for that question. I hope that helped out. All right, Nathan asks, what's involved in getting a musician to contribute to your cue? Let's say I've written a clarinet part and know someone with the means to make a decent recording of it. After I've paid him or her an agreed upon fee for the recording, is it common practice for that musician to be included in potential sync royalties down the line? Well, it really depends. By the way, Nathan, thanks for the question. It really depends on what you communicated on the front end. And if you've written a part and the clarinet player comes in and plays it, I would say that you do not owe any back-end royalties. And what I would do is I would get them a work for hire agreement, which I've talked about previously on the podcast, and I have a link to this and I'll have a link to this document. I talked about it in the previous podcast. I'm not a lawyer, okay? So just so you know, this is provided. I'm going to read this. This document is provided as a courtesy for demonstration purposes only. This is not intended to provide legal advice, and myself nor 52Qs can be held liable for your usage of this document. It's strongly recommended that you seek legal counsel before entering into any contractual agreement. All right. That having been said, this is the work for hire agreement that I use. And it basically says, hey, you're coming on, you're doing this service, and I will pay you for it, but you will not get royalties. Now, you can trade royalty percentage, but it's basically saying you don't owe that. You don't owe them anything. So if you have a musician coming in, regardless of how you are going to compensate them for it, get paperwork done. Always get it in writing. It just covers your bases. Because who knows? You might have somebody come on your track, and maybe it was a handshake and a slice of pizza. And then a little bit later, that track gets air and gets a lot of traction, and maybe starts making you some real royalties. And you say something on Facebook or in Twitter or LinkedIn, so excited to have this cue, and it got on TV, it got on football, or it showed up on CSI or whatever. And your friend over there is like, hey, wait a minute. I only got paid a slice of pizza for that. As soon as we start talking money, big money, then that can be a strain on friendships and handshake agreements. So I always encourage everybody to get everything in writing, and so you could check that out. Now, as far as finding musicians, I think that's through Network. You can also use what is it? There's a marketplace. Soundbetter.com, I think, or Fiverr, but Soundbetter is just musicians, I believe. And so also here at the 52Qs community, I bet if you went into the general discussion and just said, hey, I need somebody to do this in a track, then by all means, please do that. I mean, that's the reason that we put, we allow you to put your specialization. You're a member, Nathan, but you're also a really accomplished trombone player. And I bet if somebody went into the community and said, I need trombone, I bet you would jump at that. I have drums and percussion. So yes. But regardless, if they are not contributing creative, compositional aspects to your cue, then I would make it a work for hire. If they are providing, then I will leave that kind of up to you, and that would get into a co-write, in which case I use my co-writing agreement, which again is not legal advice, but it's the same type of a situation, which basically says, hey, what we're doing here is a co-write, and then you designate royalty splits. Even if not, you can still have somebody come in and do creative work for you, and it be a work for hire. For example, I had some jazzy tracks that I brought a bass player friend in on, and he played bass, and I didn't write a bass part for him. I'm going to let him do that. Brandon's an amazing bass player. So come in, I'm going to pay you, and I paid him for a session for him to do his bass thing, And even though he was essentially writing the bass parts, I was guiding him, giving chord progressions, and it was a work for hire for sure. Yep. All right. So I hope that helped. Thank you very much, Nathan, for that question. Robert asks, I'm interested in building my portfolio of cues ready to be ready rather when the call goes out. In the absence of taxi or other current brief at the moment, where would I go to find examples of different genres? In particular, I'm interested in acoustic guitar-based cues right now. Well, the good news is that so many libraries put their catalogs out and are available for us mortals to check out. And my favorite is Extreme Music. They are the cream of the crop. This is the production music company from Remote Control Studios, which is the Hans Zimmer crew. That's my understanding. And the composing group, which contributes a lot to Extreme Music. Extreme Music is the library, is a cabal, a consortium of composers called Bleeding Fingers. And so you can check out Bleeding Fingers on Spotify. Absolutely fantastic. But this Extreme Music is just so good. It is so good. And you can search, and I think this is new, where you can enter a search term. You can also enter in YouTube or Spotify links, and it will analyze the link and find you cues based off of that. You can upload your own WAV or MP3. That's AI for good and not for evil. And so let's say you set acoustic guitar. So let's just search here and see what we got. And so there we go. Acoustic pop. We have 725 albums to choose from here. Now, I'm not going to play any of these because, I don't want to get necessarily flagged or whatever. But I would start with Extreme Music because it is absolutely top of the game. If you get into go to Warner Chappell or Universal, you're going to be probably dealing with other sub-publishers, which I know that Extreme Music has different artists, but Extreme is the top of the game, absolute top of the game. So that's what I would do. I would go to a music library and check those out. Other libraries, you can check out Scorekeepers. I think it's called thesupervisor.com, I believe. You can check out Scorekeepers, and I'll make a note of these. I'll have links to these. I'm making a note here, as well as Atomica Music is another good one. Atomica? Yep, Atomica Music. That's John Mayer and his folks over there. Those are my three kind of top libraries that I choose from, and I think that's the best way to find references. All right. Dex asks a reminder on how to master at -10 LUFS, but rather. Because I do have a mastering video that I did, and that's how I use it. But I think the more salient question is, I'm referring to dynamic tracks that build throughout. So my current approach is to master the loudest section, maybe 8 bars to -10 LUFS, and forget about the rest, although limiting to -1 or -0.1 dB, as it's unlikely the whole cue would be used from start to end, which begs the question. Why would a library ask for it? Well, the library might ask for that type of cue that's really, really quiet to really loud for the same reason they might ask for stems and alternate versions, is to give editors maximum flexibility. But you're actually doing what I do. I find the loudest sustained phrase, right? So whatever my tempo, usually around 4 bars, my loudest sustained 4 bars in the cue, and I do my mastering from there. I have found that the vast majority of production music don't have doesn't have really wide swaths of dynamic changes. Some might, especially like tension cues and those types of things, might start off really, really quiet. But especially like for rock cues, hip hop cues, those types of more commercial music, pop stuff, you're not going to have super wide swaths of energy. And even tension cues, like pulsing tension cues and that kind of thing, within the first 10 seconds or so, we should be getting into the meat of the cue, and we should be pretty close to our target loudness. ish. I'd say within 5 to 10 dB of your target loudness within the first 10 to 15 seconds. It's not a hard, fast rule, but it's what I shoot for. So find that loudest sustained phrase, 4 bars or 8 bars, depending on your tempo, and master from there. I think that -10 LUFS is kind of getting loud unless the library is asking for it. My default is anywhere between -14 to -12. And I think limiting to 0.1 dB is pushing it. The highest I ever go is -0.2. That just makes sure that there are no transients flipping past the limiter, which might clip the output bus. So you don't want to do that. To be honest, out there in the wild, I do -1. It's a -1 limit there. But yeah, so find the loudest portion and master from there. Martin asks, is it a good idea to cover classical music, that's also public domain, in whatever genre? I think it can be. I think there are libraries probably looking for, arrangements of Clair de Lune or Für Elise or whatever. But I'm not sure how many sync libraries with a lot of backend are necessarily looking for that. I'm pretty sure it's successful, moderately successful in the stock music marketplaces. This is going to be your Pond 5s, your Motion Array, because it's cleared. You don't have to worry about copyrights, and you don't have to worry about necessarily I guess mechanicals or whatever there. So is it a good idea? Yeah, as long as you make sure that it's actually in the public domain. I did some rearrangements for Sheet Music Plus of the hymn, How Great Thou Art, which is its lyrics applied to a traditional Swedish folk song, I think, called O Stora Gut, I think is the name of that Swedish. And so somebody came and put words to that, and the words were How Great Thou Art. That's copyrighted. How Great Thou Art, the lyrics are copyrighted. So I couldn't name that arrangement, even though it was instrumental. It was a flute duet, I think. Even though it was an instrumental, I couldn't name that instrumental How Great Thou Art because the title was copyrighted. This also applies to Christmas music. A lot of Christmas music, which is perennial Christmas music you hear year after year, much of it is still copyrighted. So we just have to be careful. I mean, these Christmas songs that we know so well, like White Christmas, that's actually copyrighted. So we just have to be careful. And as far as its usefulness to the library, I think it would depend on if you bring a new take, like a new perspective on this. I'm not sure, you could just put like Für Elise on piano and pitch it to a library, especially a backend royalty sync library. Probably wouldn't necessarily use that. Now, could you make a trailer cue out of Ode to Joy or something like that? That might be cool. But yeah, give it a shot. But just make sure that it's actually in the public domain. So thank you, Martin. Really, really appreciate that question. Dolfo asked a couple of questions. One, how to pan tracks in genres like tension music. I understand it's mostly for band and orchestral styles, but not so much in the heavily synth world. I got to tell you, I use a relatively light touch when it comes to panning, especially because so many of the sounds I use, whether they're synths or orchestral sounds, already have stereo placement and stereo field and stereo effects. It might be left and right, ping pong. It could be, just a nice wide stereo width or whatever. And so I find that panning, I don't know. Like I said, I use the light touch with that. That having been said, I never hard pan anything unless it has an equal brother or sister on the other side. Like panned guitars, left and right, shakers, those types of things, because it can create an imbalanced mix, which creatively speaking could be cool, but might create some issues for a library or for an editor. So I tend not to overdo it. So regardless, I would keep it to a minimum. What I use pans with for my tension cues is I love moving things around the stereo field. I love creating stereo width. So if I have, a synth which is coming right down the middle and I want to double that synth or add another texture, then I will use usually a sample delay to create like a 10 to 15 millisecond delay on just the left side or right side so that it feels wide. And so you have something coming down the middle, you have something a little bit wider, and kind of creates one whole sound. But yeah, and the other thing that I use, which is somewhat related to panning, is my reverbs, using the reverbs from Spaces 2, the Reynolds Hall preset specifically, because they are reverb impulses from all over the orchestral stage. So if I need something that sounds kind of close-ish, kind of off to the left or stage right, then I'll use the high strings reverb. If I want something that sounds kind of far back and center, then I'll use a percussion reverb preset. And so that's somewhat related to panning, but I got to be honest, I tend just to not do a ton of panning shenanigans. That's not where I put my energy into, other than making sure that things don't sound imbalanced. And if I have a sound which is too far right or too far left, then I might counter pan in the opposite direction to kind of bring it into the center. Next question from Dolfo says, mention that samples in a PMA Zoom. It was mentioned that samples should be layered to avoid possible copyright issues and what sounded like a warning against things like easy drummer or easy bass. A general breakdown of what this means, why stacking the samples, and what the no-nos of samples or loops are and how to avoid them. Well, I'll point you to a podcast episode I did on how to use samples responsibly, where I'd say, hey, we need to talk about splice. But in general, when they talk about layering samples, it's to make sure that you don't have any one sample from splice or wherever that would or could end up on a stem or alt mix track by itself. Because while you have license to use splice samples or Apple samples or Apple Loop Library, output, whatever, what you can't do is distribute those samples on their own. And so if you have a riser, just one riser on a track, and you spit out a stem for a library that just has that riser, you're technically in breach of contract. So there's that. As far as, or you're breaching the license that you have to use that sample. But if you have, a riser plus an impact plus a whoosh and all of those things, then suddenly you're no longer distributing that single sample by itself. And that's an issue. That's a way to kind of go over that issue. The other warning about using things like easy drummer or easy bass kind of goes back to what I was talking earlier with Chris regarding sequences. And this is using patches or synths or whatever that do the work of composing for us, meaning it's playing melodic sounds, it's playing rhythmic sounds or whatever. And admittedly, it's kind of a fuzzy area, but if you have easy bass, then tons of other people have easy bass. And so if you have a bass line and you don't do anything to it, you just hold down like an E and you hear like this really cool funky bass pattern, then anybody else can do the same thing. And so it in the eyes of Content ID and TuneSat and those types of algorithms, in those eyes, it makes no differentiation between you're using a plugin to play a sequence or using a pre-recorded loop. So that's where we have to be really careful. The no-nos are, don't use an unaltered wholesale melodic, harmonic, or bass loop in your track without mangling it up. Otherwise, it will, especially melodic loops, vocal loops, that kind of thing. They'll trip up Content ID algorithms and TuneSat and that kind of thing. And so that's how we should avoid it. Go in there, chop it up, moving things around. And from a creative perspective, not depending on loops, samples, sequencers, pre-programmed sequencers to do the heavy work of composing. Right? These are tools that should be added to our process they should not be the cornerstone to our process. And so that's how I feel about that. All right. Thank you very much, Dolfo, for sending that along. I look forward to hearing your track a little bit later in the episode. Jeff asks, I've had placements for cues that have not yet been registered in my BMI catalog. Should I contact the library or be patient? And then he goes on to say it's been a year. So if I'm understanding, the cue was placed in the catalog and the cue got air. So it got placed, but that's still not showing up on your BMI. I think it's worth probably reaching out to the library, because the cue sheets can't really get made, or the accurate cue sheets can't get made without pointing that cue to your BMI, to your IPI number from BMI. So I think it's absolutely worth a reach out to your library for sure. Should you be patient? Yeah, probably. It can take a lot of time. I've had cues that got accepted to the library, and when they make air is when they get registered. This can save libraries a lot of time, so that cues that haven't made air yet don't have to spend time registering all those. And the good news is that if the cues aren't registered with your PRO, they are much easier to pull out of the library if they haven't made air in, I'd say if you have a cue with a library that hasn't made air in like 5 years and you want to chase it down, I've talked about that, before. If you want to chase it down, then you can reach out to them. And if it's not been placed, it's not been registered for the PRO, chances are they will either work to get it placed or they'll release them back to you. But I would say it's worth it if it's been a while, if it's gotten air, and if it's been more than 3 to 6 months since it's gotten air and it's not shown up in your PRO catalog yet, then that's I think worth a message to the library. If they haven't showed up on your statements yet, that's to be understood. But it takes generally 3 to 6 months for cue sheets to kind of work their way into the PRO. And if the placement was 3 or 6 months ago and it's still not in your catalog, absolutely, I would reach out to BMI. Martin asks, in the podcast, What Do Editors Want with Josh Siegel, he mentioned transition music. Are there any more detailed explanations or examples? Is transition music also subject to special forms like library music? Is it worth dealing with it more intensively, maybe even making an album? And this is a fantastic question. And, we had Josh on, and this is weird, there's me. We had Josh on during the interview, but he also gave a Q&A and did a Q review for our family and friends. And instead of me answering it, I'm going to have him answer this same question during our Q&A. And there's been a lot of chatter since your interview about transitions and kind of what that means. Can you give us another 30-second explanation of what you mean by transition music?
Yeah. So unlike a film where you just cut from scene to scene, we're not allowed to do that. So if you watch any unscripted show, at the beginning of the act and in between almost every scene, you have like a palate cleanser of like B-roll, and depending upon what you're going into or coming out of, sometimes a lyric up with vocals, and it's a palate cleanser, and it's like bigger and broader. So if you're coming off of something that's like really dark or really quiet, we don't trust our audience to stay with that. So boom, we have like a big cue with a lot going on and people are singing and it's fun and it's like something you listen to on the radio. Boom, and then we're back into like our weird dark show or like our quiet little scene. And it gives a little more sort of broadness and modern sensibility sometimes, and something you would dance to and then come back into.
Right. So it leans more towards pop and that kind of side,
or hip hop, or it tends to be pop or hip hop, but it depends on it depends, if it takes place in I did Southern Charm recently, so like that's like
Like
you
upbeat acoustic guitar kind
weird,
of tune.
weird Southern stuff and
Gotcha.
country, and even like it can be like really like kind of like dated, but like it depends upon the show. But for most of the stuff that we're doing it for like Netflix or something like that, it's stuff you would listen to on the radio
Gotcha.
that's like pop or hip hop.
Perfect. Well, then I think Jeff is your man because I know that this is his wheelhouse. All right. So, yeah, that was, I couldn't say it better myself. So Josh, again, thank you so much. That Q&A workshop was really, really fantastic. And you listened to a bunch of folks' cues, and it was in Zoom. And so, yeah, those workshops are a feature of our friends' subscribers. So, but yeah, essentially more high energy, and it depends on the type of show. And so I think an album of that stuff, I think could be really, really good. Yep. Really, really good. So yeah, hope that helped, Martin. Hope that helped. Dolfo, ask one more question. Best methods for learning the ins and outs of your instrument sample libraries and how to use them. I'm thinking specifically how to take full advantage of key switches and articulation in horn samples. Going back to a little bit what I was talking with Michael, which is spending time with your ingredients and spending time with your tools outside of like filling an order, or outside. It's like learning to cook by taking orders from people, and you're learning the recipe while you're also trying to like sell it. Whereas if you just kind of go off to the side and practice making Thanksgiving dinner over and over and over, you'll get pretty good at it. And so just like learning an instrument, it's just muscle memory. Sometimes you're just going to have to sit there and, play a C major scale on a saxophone over and over into the corner. I think John Coltrane did that, like famously, or the legend goes that he did that. But I think just working with it. Now there are, there's an articulation library service, which is totally escaping me right now. And I know folks in the chat will talk about it, that you can normalize key switches and using articulation. I think it's called articulation tools or something like that, which is, or is it, anyway, I'm not even gonna pretend to say what it is. Folks in the chat, check the doobly-doo to see below what that actually is. And I've been a subscriber of that. The fact that I can't even recall its name, I think kind of says how much I've used it. It seemed a little fiddly, and I haven't gotten much into it. Now, probably some of that is because I don't do really detailed orchestral mock-ups that require like forensic level key switches like this. Most of my stuff is ensemble based. And if I do key switches, then I'll just kind of program them in after the fact. But I do know that that's one of those things that can elevate your music beyond somebody else's. Hearing some of these experts in key switching and can create amazingly realistic orchestral sounds because they've done that. And I'm sure that articulation preset company would help with that. I just haven't found it to use in my own workflow. So yeah, but ultimately it's just practice. It's just practice and learning what each instrument does and how each company treats key switches. Some they're in the very lowest octave of the piano. Some key switches are in the very highest end of the piano, and it can be frustrating. Some key switches are with the mod wheel or the expression, and yeah, it can be a little challenging, which is what that articulation preset company looks to do, is to kind of normalize that across. So you can use the same articulation sets in Spitfire as you can in Contact or in Native Instruments or Stock Logic, is to kind of normalizes all of that. So again, totally flaking on the name of that, but the folks in the library, in the chat, Well, you know what? I'm going to find it. I'm going to find it. Give me a second. I'm going to pause it here and find it.
6.5 hours later.
All right. It's called Art Conductor by Babylon Waves. And it's articulation presets that you can add. And it, like I said, it kind of normalizes all of these articulations across different DAWs and different libraries. And so they support Logic, Cubase, Studio One, Digital Performer, and Cakewalk. So Art Conductor by Babylon Waves. So there it is. All right. And then finally, Nathan asks, how about an update on your Mac Studio? I'm looking to upgrade and leave Windows behind to a Mac Studio this summer and would appreciate hearing your thoughts. I got to tell you, the Mac Studio has been fantastic. And I think any issues that I've had, I think it's more a result of the M1 chipset versus the Mac Studio itself, because there are still, like, how many years into the M1 are we? There are still companies which aren't M1 native. And I think, like, just yesterday, as of this recording, Reason announced silicon support, which is the M1, now M2 chip, just yesterday. And so that's, I think, more of the issue. And it creates little weird problems every now and then. Simple enough to kind of work around. But the Mac Studio is whisper quiet. It's, and I don't have like the top, I have 64 gigs of RAM and I think 10 cores, which is astounding to me because my iMac was 4-core and that was an Intel machine and I only had 32 gigs of RAM. But it's whisper quiet. It's very fast. And where I've really noticed the speed isn't necessarily in, like opening Logic or adding, plugins. Where I've really noticed the speed is render times. Anything that needs to use a lot of processor and point its processor energy to, it's like a third of the time. That's not a scientific number, but things like bouncing Logic files, things like freezing tracks, things like cleaning up audio in RX takes significantly less time. Exporting video files. Anything that requires that kind of progress bar of update, the Mac Studio absolutely crushes those things. And I think I mentioned it's ridiculously quiet, especially compared to my iMac over there, which lit up like a B-52 airplane every single time I opened up more than one instance of Omnisphere. I have yet to hear this fan. I have yet to hear it. Very small footprint. Love all the inputs and outputs to it. Any other issues are going to be like my GoPro that I do my motovlogs in, and for my side camera for my live streams. It's a USB, and so it's USB-C out. But in order to pass power, then I have to find a USB-C power cable that works. And so, again, that's not the Mac Studio's fault. That's just USB-C to USB-A issues. But it's great. I have zero regrets getting it. I don't think I needed to have necessarily gotten it sooner. And again, the issues I'm having, I think, are with M1 support. And the fact that since I'm on the latest version, I'm not on the latest OS, I still haven't updated to Ventura, even though if you buy one now, you're going to get it. I'm still on whatever was Monterey, I guess, was before that, maybe. I don't know. But if Logic crashes, it's because I'm using the absolute latest version of Logic. Whereas on the iMac, which is a 2014 iMac, I was like 2 versions behind in Logic because I didn't want to update the OS. So I think that's more of the issue rather than the actual Mac Studio. But I dig it. I wouldn't get anything lower than this. I would, I got not the Ultra, or I think it is. I got the Max, and then kind of maxed that out. And the 2 terabyte hard drive as well. The 1 terabyte. I've already filled up 1 terabyte of sounds, and maybe that's just because I know I have all kinds of room. I don't need to sweat. But Yes. It's going well. Thank you, Nathan, for that question. And thanks to everybody for all of your questions. Really, really appreciate that. And we're going to be doing one of these Q&A episodes every few months, probably every 4 months or so. We'll see. Just to have an open AMA, Ask Dave Anything, and hope that was helpful for you. So we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we are going to hear a stomp clap cue from Dolfo Picano. But first, we are going to hear from Mrs. 52 Qs, who's going to tell you all about how you can join the community.
Hey, y'all. I'm Shannon Croft, and I want to tell you that the 52 Qs podcast is made possible by viewers and listeners just like you, composers and producers who are looking for a better way to connect and collaborate. You see, 52 Qs isn't just another website selling static, pre-recorded videos to a mass audience. It's a fun, vibrant, and positive community that comes together online for sharing cues, getting feedback, and discussing what's up in the production music industry. You'll find both personalized feedback and live interaction, which are the best and fastest ways to grow your skills and earn more placements. The best part is that the 52 Qs community is absolutely free. And when you're ready to take your career to the next level, we offer friends and family subscriptions, which unlock weekly live streams, live interactive group feedback sessions, monthly interactive workshops, and more. Head over to 52qs.com and sign up today. And while you're there, check out our personalized feedback videos, private lessons, and of course, merch. I can't wait to see you at 52qs.com.
All right, that was Crush 'Em All by Dolfo Picano. Thank you so much for sending this along. This was submitted during our week 17 weekly feedback thread. And he says, hey, all, looking for some feedback on this track I did for this Stomp Clap taxi listing that's running. My first venture at a Stomp Clap, but not rock tunes. I still need to do some mastering work to clean up some 60 cycle hum, but I'm really looking for some feedback on structure, the level of interest it keeps, and your thoughts on Stomp Clap sounds. Not sure I am happy with it. Yeah, just here at the top, let's probably need to clean up. There's a little bit of a click here at the top, and so we'd definitely want to trim up that beginning so it's nice and clean. The first thing out of the gate is I think the vibe of this is spot on. There's a lot of kind of meaty swagger to this that I think works really, really well. I will say when I think of Stomp Claps, I feel I go to kind of We Will Rock You kind of territory. Boom, boom, clap, boom, where meaning the kick pattern is generally, in my opinion, much more simple. Much simpler. Boom, clap, boom, clap, boom. I mean, you can almost get away with 1 and 3. Because we have, which kind of puts this energy, but it's more boom, boom. It's much more plodding, much more deliberate. And I think the kick pattern is inserting a little bit too much kind of funkiness into it. Also, let's watch out. I feel like not everything is really tight. So we might need to get in there and tweak some of the transients with the kick, with the guitars, to make sure that everything's really locked together. And I feel the balance of the guitar is a little too far on the left. There's one. Yeah, I feel like there's one guitar sound coming here on the left. I was going to sing the part, but it's all unison. So yeah, it feels a little imbalanced. And so I would make sure that there's something on the right side of equal or similar frequency range, so it doesn't sound a little imbalanced, because right now it feels like a little bit too much on the left side. I think I might have said right side. I meant left side. And I think we could have more claps and layering claps, and make sure that the claps aren't all like really, really on top of each other. So it's much more, again, think We Will Rock You, I think, is kind of the poster child for this. Now, I haven't listened to any of these references from this search. Nice build here. Nice adding layers on top of it. Nice little kind of interlude. Yeah, see, I don't know if you need this fill. Again, it feels like it's just a little outside of like what a boots, stomp, and clap kind of thing. See, here we're starting to get to the boots and the claps. It feels a little bit, I think we can come out of the gate with that type of energy. And also, I'm showing that we're hitting 0-0 here. If I were to actually kind of move, we're actually hitting 0-0. Back up a little bit. Not sure where it was. Yeah, I don't know. I must be hallucinating or something. But yeah, I would watch out. Probably bring the level of that limiter down, the ceiling, making sure that I would put -1. Because our peaks are getting dangerously close to unity. There we go. Yep, just clipped into the zeros on that right. As far as this section here, I think that's really, really cool, and I like it, but I feel like the energy really takes a nosedive here. And I'm not sure, thinking like, an editor, thinking like a library, I'm not sure that this would be very useful for him. It's very creative, and I dig it. And if this were, a song that I was watching somebody play, and so I wonder, if just having a bar or 2 bars of that, and maybe, because the problem is that the energy really, really dives out, right? And it feels like what is going to be an extended interlude, where somebody's going to solo on top of it or do a Vox box kind of thing, Peter Frampton thing going on. But we might be able to get away with this if we hold out the bass or the guitar through it. Just so it doesn't nosedive quite so much. It's really cool, but I'm not sure you need it. And looking at the waveform, we can see some pretty clear structures here. I could tell where that is. I could tell what's going on here and here. This section here feels a little long, but this is obvious, very, very, very drastic change. And maybe if we're going to do this, maybe bring this idea in a little bit earlier, maybe somewhere around the minute mark or so, because we're right around 2 minutes. So bring that in a little bit earlier. Might be able to kind of cover that, but coming in at a minute 30 by the last 30 seconds, we should be really pushing things very forward. And do you ever hit that kind of B section? Yeah, we never hit that B section again, and I think we should. I think with these kind of rock type forms, we can get away with forms in production music that lean a little more in towards commercial. So we have kind of our intro, and then we have our A, and then we have another A, and then we have an A, or a B, and then we have an A and an A, and then we have the C, and then we have an A, right? So that's overall. I think we can get away with intro, A, B, A, maybe B here, then going into the C, and then the A. Yep. So take this chunk, take your B section, instead of doing a double A, because we've already heard it. We've now heard it 1, 2, 3 times. We don't need to hear it a 4th time, and we're going to hear it a 5th time. So intro, A, B, C, A. That would be my form suggestion. As far as the mix, it feels a little loud, and some of the guitars feeling a little kind of boxy. A lot of energy kind of right in here. And I don't think you saw this on the mastering chain. I think that would be a little bit too extreme. I would, the main guitar, scoop a little bit out there. Yeah, that would be my recommendation. But Dolfo, thank you so much for sending this along. And I like the title, Crush 'Em All. I think that's a really good title. Like I mentioned, this was sent along during our week 17 weekly feedback thread, and we put weekly feedback threads together every single week. And next week, I will be choosing one of the cues listed here in our week 18 and featuring it next week on the podcast. Speaking of next week, you want to make sure to join us because I'm going to be joined by Mr. John Meyer, who is an amazing musician, fantastic composer, and a fantastic YouTuber, and makes his own sample libraries. He has a new sample library coming, or that has been released, and we are going to be talking about that new drum library, and he's going to be joining me and talking about his upcoming webinar, which will be hosted at 52Qs. So you definitely want to stick around. By the way, if you enjoyed that feedback video from earlier and you want feedback on your own cues. Keep in mind that if you go to 52cues.com/coaching, you can order up your own feedback video where I do a breakdown of your cue, talk about everything from the title to the mix to form, structure, harmony, melody, all of those things. Again, head over to 52cues.com/coaching and order up your own. And while you're there, you can book a one-on-one Zoom session or sign up to be notified when we start enrollment for our summer 2023 mastermind. But that's going to do it for me. Thank you so much for joining me. And thank you for all of the support, with the year of taxi and everything going on. I would love to hear from you in the comments. Please let me know. I read all those comments and I do make an effort to respond, but that's going to do it for me. Again, a huge thanks to the family, friends, and patrons. Please know that I love and appreciate all of you. And yeah, just know that regardless of what happens this week, that the universe has amazing plans just for you. Until next time, peace. The 52 Cues podcast is copyright 2023 at 18 Studios, all rights reserved. The music played on the podcast is copyright of their respective owners and is used with permission and for educational purposes only. For more information, including joining the community and submitting your cue for consideration on the podcast, head over to 52cues.com.